John Rossetti from PNC. At PNC, we are committed to a culture where everyone feels valued and included. That's why we're pleased to support the Greater Wyoming Valley Chamber's efforts to help create a community with those same values. It is my pleasure to introduce Erica Acosta and Dan Kimbrough. Erica was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and graduated from the State University of New York, Buffalo, with a bachelor's degree of arts in Spanish. In 2008, she moved to Wilkes, Pennsylvania, working for Misericordia University as a multicultural student outreach coordinator. While working for Misericordia, she obtained a Master's of Science degree in Organizational Management with a concentration in Human Resources. She found her passion for diversity, equity, and social justice education. This led to the development of Misericordia University's Multicultural Education Program. She created and developed innovative programming to educate the community on cross-cultural issues and created diversity awareness. Currently, she is a Director for Diversity Initiatives at Wilkes University. She provides support and services for undergraduate students from underrepresented groups, as well as facilitates and coordinates efforts across the university to enhance diversity and enrich the academic, social, and cultural experiences of members of the campus community. Her search for ways to engage students on campus led her to develop a diversity certificate program for undergraduates. The DIVE, Difference, Inclusion, Value Each Other certificate. The program offers students opportunities to show their passion for diversity and inclusion in their campus community. She also created a diversity and inclusion student conference where local colleges and universities attend a day-long conference about equity and social justice topics. Erica finished her MBA at Wilkes University in May 2020. Her passion for diversity and inclusion has led her to take a leadership role in the multicultural parade of the city of Wilkes-Barre. She also serves her community by sitting on several boards in the community. Dan Kimbrough is an educator with over 2 decades of classroom training and presenting experience. Topics span teaching media criticism, media literacy, conflict mediation, intercultural communications, race and racism in America, systemic racism, Black history, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and JEDI training and consulting, media production, content creation, and live sports production. Dan also serves on various boards and councils, helping to build and make a better local community, including the American Cancer Society, New York, Pennsylvania region, Big Brothers Big Sisters of Northeastern Pennsylvania, the American Advertising Federation, and the Greater Wyoming Valley Chamber of Commerce. When not working in the community, Dan is the owner of Park Multimedia, a content creation and storytelling media company that works with individuals and businesses to tell their stories through media. Now I'd like to welcome Erica Acosta and Dan Kimbrough.
Welcome everyone to our session. Today we're going to be talking about race might be easier than you think. I'm going to be co-presenting this with Dan Kimbrough, so join us as we engage in dialogue. So why are we talking about race and why does race matters? It matters for many different reasons. We're currently living in a multicultural world, and we also know that there's a lot of people walking in different walks of life and that they all might look different than what we are. So we want to engage in talking about race and also addressing the elephant in the room. Oftentimes we are afraid or intimidated to do these things because we might not have the tool. Today, we're going to engage, provide you with the tools, and we're going to start that off by talking about a quote that I really like from Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. And it goes like this: race matters. Race matters. Race matters in part because of the long history of racial minorities being denied access to the political process. Race also matters because of persistent racial inequality in our society, inequality that cannot be ignored and that has produced stark socioeconomic disparities. This refusal to accept the stark reality that race matters is regrettable. The way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to speak openly and candidly on the subject of race and to apply the constitutions with eyes open to the unfortunate effects of centuries of racial discrimination. As a member of the judiciary tasked with intervening to carry out the guarantee of equal protection, we ought not to sit back and wish away, rather than to confront the racial inequality that exists in our society. So join us as we talk about race, engage in our dialogue. And as you can see, I'm talking about engaging in dialogue because I will let you know later in the slide why we want to engage, right? We want to bring people to the table. We don't want to scare them away from having these conversations. And why is it important to talk about race? Because first thing, we want to avoid the misinformation. We don't want to be perpetuating misinformation, misfacts about individuals, race, community, or and such. Biases. We all must admit that we all have biases, but we need to engage in conversation to reduce and minimize those biases that will then cause us to create stereotypes or microaggression. We also want to talk about the racial injustices that are happening in our community and how those race um, stereotypes or biases impact these communities. And the only way we can do that is if we engage and learn from the communities and learn their stories. We must break the cycle. The cycle ends with us. I oftentimes you will hear me talk about my family, my husband and my daughter, and I say the cycle stops with me. You know, I know what my mom and my parents had taught me, and I'm like sometimes those jokes, those water cooler jokes, are very inappropriate. So I don't want to pass them down to my daughter. So I want to make sure that stops with me, right? And how do we engage in these conversations? Start with having them with your family members, practice with them. You know, that's always a safe route, and then talk to your students, your colleagues, your members in your business. We also want to reduce assumptions, right? Assumptions. Why we want to reduce assumptions? Because if we reduce the assumptions, it will lead to a better understanding to our communities who we're working with in our establishments. Because we don't want to be continuing perpetuating these assumptions about race. Some helpful tips that I feel like they help me. You know, I've been in this work for 13 years and I'm going to tell you I'm not perfect, but this helps me stay focused, right? Engage in open, honest discussion about race and racism. Talk about it, address it, call it what it is. Let's not try to be around the bush because oftentimes doing that or tiptoeing around the topic might not be as an open, honest conversation, right? Oftentimes we leave those conversations to the people who are from those backgrounds. But let me tell you, as an individual from a Latina background that often talks about diversity and inclusion, it tends to be tasking at times. Why can't we have other peers or a group of us just talking about the conversation? Why does it always have to be that person trying to help others understand? Right? We can all engage in this conversation if we're willing to learn and read books on different conversation. Hey, look, you took the first step. You in this Zoom webinar with us today. You are in part of the chamber. You became or engaged or a part of the chamber. So just stay engaged and connected. Get comfortable with the uncomfortable. As you all know, for those of you that know me, I don't like to public speak. And here I am trying to engage with you in talking about race because this is a topic that is very important to me. And I definitely want you all to learn from one another here today. And I know for some of us, anxiety and fears are a concern, right? Because we are afraid to say the wrong things or just talking about race, diversity, and inclusion might bring anxiety. How do we dismiss or reduce those? Easy. Join a podcast, talk to different friends, read a book, engage. Now, the way the world is evolving, everything is a Google away or a YouTube away. You know, make sure you are engaging in the right platforms and getting the right information to help you understand. Understand the purpose of the conversation. Do not wait until you're in the hot seat to engage about race, okay? Don't wait until your HR coordinator brings you in or a faculty member says, oh, you know, that paper that you did was not very sensitive. Try to educate yourself before these incidents happen. Once again, engage in dialogue, don't debate. For the last 5 years, I noticed that the world, our society, is all about I'm right and you're wrong, and we're not engaging in dialogue. We need to bring back that unity where we can actually sit down with one another or FaceTime one another or Zoom one another to have these conversations where we feel comfortable, right? And not a debate. I'm not here to say, oh, look, I got this over you or this over this person or over this group. Let's just engage and sit down and have an honest conversation because at the end of the day, we all want to be valued and seen. So I came across the University of Missouri's webpage where they have tips on engaging and talking about race. I'm going to see if I can get this to Ben and a PDF so that you all can have it and you all can use it. Even though it's tailored for college students, honestly, I think everybody can really take these tips and have helpful information just as you look at it, right? And you can unpack that on your own time, right? But three of those that actually stand out to me and that I want to unpack with you here today is understand how race and class impact experiences. We need to understand that those two go hand in hand, right? I can share a personal story when we all had to move and pivot from being in the university campus to going remote at home. The first thing they were like, okay, does everybody have a computer and internet? I was ashamed to say that I didn't have internet. I had a computer, but I had to reduce my internet bill because I was like, that's ridiculous. I'm not paying for this. But I'm like, how do I tell my boss I don't have internet? So here I am scrambling the last few minutes to get internet. And if you all know, if you all experience the same thing, it was really hard to get a provider to come to your house during COVID to install your internet provider. So let's try to reduce those anxieties, those fears for your coworkers, peers, students by offering other feasible accommodation. And the one way that the university did that for a student was they gave the students laptop and hot pods. How you call this is like when you go hotspots. There you go, hotspots, so that the students were able to have internet in their home. And I was like, oh, that's a pretty cool thing that the university did. We had one provost go to different students' home. I'm like, he was driving 2 hours. I was like, you see, I love Wilkes. That was going above and beyond. And we can do that for one another, go above and beyond. Practice active listening. I'm a New Yorker. You guys know I'm a New Yorker. As a New Yorker, all we have time, hi, how you doing? And we keep it moving. We never sit down and actually say, hi, how you doing? And wait for a response. Let's try to be active listeners and listen. If somebody walks into your office or into your room or stops you, put your phone away, turn your computer away, and give them your undivided attention. I know I have a 5-year old. Giving her my undivided attention as I'm trying to multitask is really hard. But you know what? She holds me accountable. Mommy, you still have your phone? I'm like, you're right. Sorry. And I will put it away and then we will engage in conversation. So have other people around you hold you accountable. Accountability is key. The only way we can reduce these types of biases and perpetuating this misconception is by engaging and being active and present. Avoid dismissing or minimizing someone else's experience. And I can tell you, as a Latina, as because I also identify as Black, when I'm in spaces where I'm the only one, and I often say, you know what, I didn't like the way that person looked at me, I didn't like the tone, why I didn't like the way this email came across. Oftentimes, when I go to someone else, they'll be like, are you sure? Are you sure that's what they meant? I'm like, yes, I understand how I felt and how I perceived it. Oftentimes, I would like to be validated for that feeling and how I felt instead of being dismissed. Because when often we feel dismissed, we will never engage in another conversation with that individual. Or let's say if something were to happen bigger, I know I can never relate to that person if I had to file a complaint or a report. And we are all learning. This is a learning process. Like I mentioned before, I'm still learning. I continue to learn. And I continue to learn by reading books, listening to podcasts, coming here, talking to my network, and trying to do better and having these real honest conversations. Give yourself some grace to be wrong, to say the wrong things, because that's the only way we learn. We can't always say the right things at all times. So give yourself some grace. Some little reflection tips I would like to leave you all with is, what does it take for me to feel safe in speaking up? I know when I started this work, I was only 23 years old. Now I'm going to age myself. I'm 37, right? So with age, became more affirmed in what I was believing and what I was reading. I'm like, I know this kind of conversation and I can probably offer some tips in engaging others in this conversation. So as I got older, I was able to do that, but I needed the tools in order to feel that, right? So I had proper mentors. I kept reading books. I continue to go to different conferences to learn more because I definitely am passionate about DEI work. In what ways can I serve an ally and help bridge the difference during difficult situation? If you're a supervisor, a colleague, or anyone that you might be working in, just check in on your colleagues. okay? When you see the news of somebody being killed or somebody being shot down, talk to your colleagues. They are not well. Say, hey, I noticed, I saw this on the news. Are you okay? Do you need some help? How do you want to unpack that? Don't even come in today if you're not feeling or willing to put up with the work environment today. Give them some grace, okay? Knowing that dialogue fuels action, what is one thing I can do differently to hold myself and others responsible for communicating across differences, even when things seem to feel hopeless? This is a good one. This is me every day. You know, I still have hope in people. I believe that people mean well and do good, right? Just because you're doing good doesn't always equal good intentions, right? So oftentimes, I try to do what I can and perpetuate those good intentions with the people around me in my community and try to engage in conversations like this. And I'm glad you all are all here in engaging with me in the conversation. So this is actually the first step for you all. Food for thought, okay? We need to understand that we all walking on this earth differently, right? We all have different interactions. We have all different lived experience. Those lived experience shape how we interact with our daily world. Okay. This is a quote that I actually really enjoyed from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund that they did in Philadelphia for their Starbucks company. We just need to recognize that that black people are navigating the public space differently than white people. Once we acknowledge that we are all walking differently, with different interactions, either positive or negative, we will then be able to engage in this conversation and address those inequalities together. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Erica, for that presentation. So we've learned about why it's important to talk about race and why acknowledging and accepting race is important. So how does this relate into the workplace? So I'm going to start with the story. When I first started Park Multimedia, I had a client that I was designing a website for, and we had never met in person, but I had seen him clearly because I had put his photo on the website. And he worked in Detroit, worked with inner city youth, doing presentations, some counseling with families, things of this nature. He was a great individual, and we needed to have a conversation that email wasn't working anymore. So we decided we were going to go ahead and set up a meeting and meet in person. And we met. He was in Detroit. I was in Lansing. We met off the side of the highway at a rest stop, gas station that had a restaurant in there. And so I'm sitting and waiting because I got there a little early, and I see him walk in with his assistant, and I sort of wave, and they walk right by me. That was a little weird, but maybe they were just hungry and getting something to eat first. So a couple minutes goes by, and my phone rings, and it's him calling me to see if I had shown up yet. And I'm thoroughly confused because I'm sitting here staring at him, and I was like, hey, turn around, I'm right here. And he turns around, and looks at me and goes, you're black? I had no clue. I've been telling all of my friends I got this cool white guy who's helping me design my website, this, that, and the other, blah, 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 blah. Funny thing is, he was black. But due to microaggressions, understanding bias in these things, and he works with inner city youth, he'd assumed because I'm prompt, I'm professional, spoke well, that I was a white guy. And it blew my mind to think that this is someone working in this field doing this work who made the assumption that I was white based on how I presented myself as a business owner. And so the idea of talking about race in the workplace becomes important because assumptions can lead to negative situations. Now, this one didn't end up being negative. We laughed it off, continued to talk, things worked out in the long run. But when we're talking about the idea of race in the workplace, it's important because we have to learn to value each individual for who they are, because our differences are make us who we are, but those differences can help build our companies overall. So why, as a business or a company, does race matter? So there's the beginning of it is the idea of we have to collect demographic data, whether it's because of the EEOC data that you need to collect, whether it's recruitment or looking at unlawful hiring practices. All of these things are important, so we have to collect that data. But that doesn't mean that that's the end of it, right? Understanding who works for you as a business or a company can actually be a benefit that we'll get to later on. But when we look at our recruitment data, if we're collecting that demographic data up front on applications, we can see how our recruitment is working and who's coming into our businesses just by looking at our applications. But also to make sure that we're not doing things that are going to get us in trouble in the long run, collecting that demographic data and understanding the race and ethnicities of those that we're working with also can help protect us as businesses. And so if we're doing the best that we can to recruit and be diverse, discussing race and understanding who's working with us comes in handy. And so that's one of the main reasons that understanding who works with us and that data is important. But are we actually talking about race when we're discussing these conversations? On the screen right now are technically the 5 racial categories as set up by the Office of Communication and Business for the government. So when we're looking at not specifically census data, but when talking about businesses, technically the only 5 races in America are white, black or African American, American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian or Native Hawaiian, and other Pacific Islanders. That list seems pretty short, doesn't it? Because when we're talking about race, we have to understand that race is really a social construct. And so we're not looking at the idea of ethnicities and other peoples, right? And so there are many arguments that, well, wait, why isn't Jewish on here? Because Jewish people are a race as well. Are they a race or is it an ethnicity? Well, that's not the argument we're trying to have. What we're trying to talk about, the idea is how we look to categorize people comes down to how people identify themselves, not a government form or these other things. And so if we're talking about race specifically, this is what race is. Is that actually what we're here to discuss, though? It's probably more we're talking about ethnicities. What makes us who we are? Erica says that she's a Latina, but also identifies as being black. But Latina doesn't show up on this race category. So does her race not exist? That's not the case. And so when we're discussing race and we're talking about the idea of race in the workplace or even amongst our friends group, we have to understand that labels, while they may serve a function in the business world, don't really play well in our individual lives. And so these categories may work for census data and other things, but there are a lot more ways of how we describe ourselves and how we put ourselves out there moving forward. And so when we're talking about race, are we actually talking about race or are we talking about ethnicity? If you're from NEPA in this area, ethnicity is a humongous thing. People identify as Lithuanian or they're Russian or they have Russian background or they're Ukrainian. You have people here from Ireland. Going back to the coal mine days, ethnicity is extremely important. That's probably more important than actually talking about race. And if we're discussing ethnicity and or race, that's a way to enrich our business lives, right? Knowing where people come from, what excites them, what passions they have, and who they are as individuals. The other way we can confuse race sometimes is, are we actually talking about regionality, right? We may talk about people's dialects and dialogues. You may assume that someone speaks a certain way because of their race. It could probably be that's just where they're from. So if they're not from NEPA originally, or if you leave NEPA and go somewhere else, let me tell you, you have an accent as well. All right. And so that doesn't mean that it has anything to do with your race. It's where you're from regionally within this country. And so that's another way that we can talk about who we are without tripping into talking about race accidentally. Also, nationality. People who aren't from this country may fall into racial categories that we in this country put on, but that doesn't mean that that's how they identify either. Technically, black is anyone who has African ancestry, right? There are a lot of people who have African ancestry who aren't black. I always like to bring up Charlize Theron. Charlize Theron is from South Africa. That's in Africa. Is Charlize Theron black? Probably not. And so nationality is another way that we can identify people and ourselves and talk about individuals that helps to enrich our business place as well. And there are many other categories. So race versus this and that or whatever. So are we actually talking about race when we talk about difference? We may be and we may not be. And that's something that we have to be careful with because we don't want to categorize people in ways that don't feel normal for them or how they identify themselves. We've heard at this conference people talk about whether we're talking about gender, we're looking at LGBTQ issues, we're talking about access and ability. People get to define who they are and we need to respect that. But by engaging, as Erica said, and having dialogues, we can figure out, is it someone's race that is the behavior that you're looking at and that's how they identify it? Or is it their ethnicity? Is it the region of the country that they come from and that's where their personality and behavior traits come from? Or is it their race? Is it their nationality and what they bring from other countries or the race they identify with? But you only figure those things out from having an actual dialogue and not making assumptions. And that's the key when we're talking about race in the workplace, is that we need to have conversations with individuals. And not HR having a conversation with you, but as groups, whether it's an employee resource group, whether it's after work hanging out with individuals, whether it's during break times, we need to have conversations with one another. But we need to talk with each other and not about each other. And that's a very big thing. If you're talking about someone, you're probably talking about them and making assumptions or working off of stereotypes. But if we talk with someone new gets hired who looks different than you, sounds different than you, maybe prays different than you. Ramadan is approached at this point in time, and so maybe they're not eating and they're fasting throughout the day. Well, don't get together with a group of people and talk about that person. Talk with them. Ask why what they're doing is why they're doing what it is that they're doing. And let them explain to you whether it's race, whether it's religion, whether it's region, whether it's any of these things, and then have that conversation and get to know them better on a one-on-one level. That's how you can easily talk about race in the workplace and not worry about tripping into issues because you're having a conversation with someone, not conversations about people. The other thing also is that have these conversations one-on-one or with a group. Be careful. One-on-one conversations work well to get to know someone, but if you start bringing these things up in a group, someone may not feel comfortable yet in a group setting having that conversation because they haven't felt part of the workplace yet. So it's easier to start with one-on-one conversations and have someone get to know this person. A lot of companies will set up mentorship programs where when a new employee comes in, they're given a mentor, not specifically dealing with race or anything else. They're just given a mentor to help them ease into the new workplace environment. And that person can have these one-on-one conversations, get to know them, get them to open up a little bit more, and help guide them through that office environment, right? That's a lot easier on someone than being in a group environment and having to divulge, oh, I happen to be this or this or this, when they don't feel comfortable in that workplace. And so by having conversations with individuals, by making sure that we're not talking about people and allowing people to identify who they are and how they want to be seen by the world, we can have much easier conversations about race that don't end up in HR because we're actually getting to know people and that helps our business environment grow. And so what are these benefits, right? Your company culture begins to grow as well because now you know who works for you and what it is that interests them and what they bring to the table that may be different than other people. And so that helps to grow that company culture and allow for people to be themselves. It also helps to reduce a lot of microaggressions. If I know that someone happens to be this and that this may offend them because of their religion or their race or these things, that can help me to be better with my behaviors in the workplace, right? What I do at home, hopefully I'm not an evil individual at home, but in the workplace, it's kind of my job to make sure that everyone in the workplace feels welcome and safe. It's all of our jobs. And so by understanding what makes us different, we can actually help to reduce those microaggressions and build a better workplace. It also helps to create a safe place within the workplace where people feel open and the ability to be honest with other individuals as well. So if I feel safe and I feel welcome in the workplace, I'm more likely to share more about who I am and what makes me different, but also what makes me similar to other individuals. But that has to happen in a safe environment where I feel free and open to do those things. It can also help bring awareness. Let's say you run an organization and you have a set of holidays that you're going to run that people get time off for, and you don't know who all your employees are, you may miss a holiday that someone celebrates. I work in the audiovisual field, and anyone will tell you we know all the Jewish high holidays because the B&H Photo is a company that we have to work with, and they are closed for most Jewish holidays. So when I go to order equipment, I have to make sure I check a Jewish calendar to look at the holidays that are up to make sure that I don't miss a date that I need equipment to show up, right? But that's because I'm aware of that because this is someone that I work with in my supply chain. And so because of that, I'm aware about what's going on in that faith and that religion, and it allows me to make sure that when I'm ordering things, I'm being a part of it. I'm being aware of that as well. It also helps to make people feel seen and accepted in the workplace. You want to help to reduce turnover? Make sure the people that are working for you feel seen and accepted, that they have a voice and that they can be a part of the actual workplace, which gets into the idea of equity and inclusion. If they're there, they have an active voice, they have a fair seat at the table, you're probably going to have people who want to work for your company a lot more, help recruit for your company, which will also help in diversifying as well, because they'll bring in their diverse friends and say, hey, I work for this great company that does all these wonderful things and allows me to be who I am. And so if we're going to talk about race in the workplace, there are ways to do it that are actually talking about it, but not about the individual, that brings people in and allows them to feel safe and welcome in the workplace. And those are the things that we need to do. And that's what helps make talking about race a lot easier. All right. So Eric and I are going to jump in the chat now. And if you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you.